Hey everybody, I'm Miss Jaime OT. Thanks so much for joining me for my webinar, How and Why to Teach Letter Formations in Groups. This is a really special webinar to me because it's something that I've been teaching for years, and I just find that it saves so much time, it's so practical, it's so efficient. I'm really happy to be sharing this information with other OTs, teachers, and parents. So let's get started. My name's Jaime Spencer. I am a school-based occupational therapist. My mission is to help you to help your kids. I've been a school-based occupational therapist for 20 years, and I can't even believe that, but it's true. And I've been working in a public school with kids kindergarten to high school. Over the 20 years, I've learned so many things and so many different ways to help kids. But one of the things that really stuck out to me was how kids' fine motor skills just aren't what they used to be. And this impacts many, many aspects of their learning, but one of those aspects is handwriting. So I'm excited to talk to you today about that, and I'm going to teach you my tricks for teaching handwriting in groups. Another thing about me, I am a big school-based occupational therapy advocate. I've been fighting for equal rights for school-based occupational therapists for about 10 years now. So in case you're wondering what I'm talking about, maybe you're not aware of the fact that throughout the United States, in many, many states, in most states, occupational therapists who work in the schools are not treated equally just to other school professionals. So what that means is when an OT starts working in a school district, there are other teachers too. There's teachers and social workers and psychologists. All of those other professionals have the ability, if they wish, to go on and further their education and become a school administrator and end up being a leader in the educational setting. So maybe they have aspirations to be a principal or a special ed director, or even, the sky's the limit. Maybe they want to be the superintendent. Any of those other master's level or higher educational professionals that work in the school setting are allowed to take the coursework if they want to become an administrator. But in most states throughout the United States, occupational therapists aren't allowed. There's no pathway for them to show or utilize their leadership skills. And it's something that's really an issue for many school-based OTs. Because we don't have a seat at the table, it impacts our parity and our equality in the school setting. And there's so many things that are impacted by that. But if you want to learn more about it, I hope you'll join me in my Facebook group, USA School-Based OTs Looking for Change, and I will tell you all about it. For now, let's just learn about handwriting. Before we get started talking about handwriting, I just want to go over a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, if anything goes wrong with any of your downloads, if you purchase a product and you don't see it, or maybe you had issues with figuring out how to print it or something like that, please email me at customerservice@missjamieot.com. This might seem like a silly thing to say. Of course you'll email me, but unfortunately in this day and technology age, everybody has so many different streams of communication. I myself, I have an Instagram page, a Facebook page, I have a Miss Jaime OT Facebook page, and multiple emails. Every once in a while, after something like this, a webinar or a big launch of a new product, I'll find messages that someone may have sent me through one of those other streams. And maybe they had a question or they were looking for help. And because they didn't email me at customer service, I might not have seen it right away. And I always feel really terrible about that. So please, if there's anything you need, or if you have any questions after this webinar, make sure that you email me at customerservice@missjamieot.com. I'm happy to hear from you and I would love to help you. So I want to make sure that I get your message. I want to also talk about some of the products that I will be featuring during this webinar. So I have to have full disclosure to let you know that these are my products as a Miss Jaime OT business owner, and I want to just let you know where you can find them and the fact that I do sell them. So I have a basics packet. This is a 32-page packet, and this is kind of sums up everything that you need to know to teach letter formations in groups, but it is the basics. It's the most simple letters that you can teach in groups. And I'll be showcasing a lot of them as we go through the webinar and explaining why it's easiest to teach letters in groups. But if you're interested in finding the basics packet, you can get it on my website, and the link is right there, missjamiot.com/HW basics. And that's my basics packet. As you know, this webinar, I'm so excited, is approved for AOTA CEUs. So when you purchased this product, you received an email with the link to take the assessment. You need to take the assessment and get at least a 70% in order to receive your CEU certificate from us. If you don't see your certificate, and it should be delivered as soon as you're done with the assessment and you hit submit, if you don't see it in your inbox, please check your spam and your junk mail. Unfortunately, a lot of emails block messages that come from businesses. And because the certificate will be coming from missjamiot.com, you may not actually see it. It might go right to your spam. So that happens to us business owners a lot. But it's a good piece of information for everybody. If you can't find something that you ordered from a business, always check your spam and your junk. Very often, that's where it's hiding. To go along with this webinar, I have a handwriting workbook that I created. The link that you can find it at is missjamiot.com/HW workbook. And this is the companion workbook to this webinar. You don't need to buy the workbook in order to view the webinar, and you don't need to view the webinar in order to use the workbook, but they go hand in hand really nicely together. So if you're interested in having the workbook to use these theories rather than creating your own pages or your own lessons, you can check them out on my site. And this is a 120 plus page product. So it has all of the letters in groups as well as by themselves. I've also created some Jamboards. So if you're familiar with Jamboard, it is basically a virtual whiteboard, and any of the sheets that I'm showing you today will be available on Jamboard, and this is the link for that. Okay, so let's get to the good stuff. This right here is a cheat sheet for how to teach letter formations in groups. This cheat sheet is included in your basics packet, and I believe it's also included in the workbook. But this 2-page cheat sheet is a great resource for teaching people or even following through to let parents know and teachers know how to teach the letters in groups. One page features uppercase letters that are good to group together, and another page features the lowercase letters that go well together. And when you look at it and you read through the handout, it just makes so much sense. So why this webinar is needed? First of all, there's a lot less time for handwriting instruction nowadays. As we know, our little ones are being bombarded with reading and math, and our teachers, unfortunately, are also being pressed for time, and they are often being evaluated on their children's test scores and particularly how their kids are doing in math and reading. So little by little, this gives us less time for handwriting instruction. And research shows that in order for kids to make progress, they need to practice. But we're also seeing that children who haven't mastered the basic writing tasks are forced to move on too quickly, and this can impact their self-esteem, their frustration, and even how much they like school. If they're forced to move on too quickly and they haven't mastered the first skill, it's harder for them to build on, and it's harder for them to learn the next step. Hoy, Egan, and Fetter said that this is probably the cause for most handwriting problems, the rushing. So why this method is effective? The method of teaching letters in groups, and when I say groups, I don't mean groups of children. I mean teaching more than one letter at a time by groups. So we're going to be learning about how certain letters just make sense to learn together and other letters might not. But this is a universal theory. So if your kids or your child has been learning how to write using, let's say, the Zahner Bloser program or the Size Matters program or some other handwriting program, it's okay. And you want to keep using that and you want to follow through with that. but my workbook and my theories are perfect for reteaching and practicing and really helping your kids master what it is that they're learning in school. Because our kids, they do need that extra practice. This is perfect for teachers, parents, and therapists. Everybody can use this method and these theories to help their kids. Again, it's practical. There's a lot less time for teaching handwriting. So teaching more than one letter at a time can be really helpful. And that might seem kind of counterproductive. I just said there's not enough time and we don't want to rush our kids. And we don't. But I'm going to explain why teaching certain letters together just makes sense. And we'll see a little bit more about that in a minute. This is research-based. As I said before, this is AOTA approved, and there's tons of resources that back up what I'm going to be showing you. A lot of handwriting programs have similar components to it, and I'll explain about that as we go on. My theory builds on prior learning. Teachers use a process called scaffolding when they teach in the classroom. And scaffolding is the process of teaching children something small, and then once they've mastered that, moving on. So an example would be children learn how to count, and then when they become better at that, they may learn how to add small numbers together. So the teacher scaffolds on the child's previous learning to help them master the new skill. And this is, a wonderful way to help our kids feel successful, to decrease frustration, and to make sure that they master what it is that we're showing them next. The objectives of this webinar. We are going to identify 4 reasons why teaching letter formations in groups is more effective than the traditional method. And by traditional, I mean A to Z. In the old days, we may have learned capital A and lowercase a in 1 week, and then the next week we would learn capital B and lowercase b. And we're going to learn throughout this webinar why that's not always the best way. You're also going to learn how to recognize which letter formations should be taught together. We're going to understand that motor planning plays a role in handwriting development, a big role. It's a really important part that unfortunately, when we're not teaching letters in groups by letter formation, sometimes gets overlooked. Research shows that handwriting dysfunction occurs in 25 to 33% of school-age kids. That's a lot of children. That's 1 in 4 kids. So 1 in 4 kids is having difficulty with handwriting. And to add to the problem, there's less time for handwriting instruction. So we've got something going on here that we've got to conquer. Occupational therapy practitioners often are referred kids who have handwriting issues. Most of the time, we're referred kids who have special needs with handwriting issues, but typically developing kids are having trouble too. And this program is great for helping all the kids, and it just makes sense. It's reasonable to believe that improvements in letter quality may precede improvements in speed. This makes so much sense. Once we get a child feeling that they've mastered a letter, once we get them writing it correctly and neatly, it only makes sense that they'll be able to write it faster down the road. But they need to practice, and that's how they're going to get that motor memory down. Hoy et al. Says that practicing for at least 20 minutes twice a week is enough. Handwriting without tears, on the other hand, generally will recommend doing it for less than 20 minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, but to do it more often. I had experience a few years ago where I did research in my school district, and I actually researched 3 different handwriting programs, and it was a huge undertaking. We did it in 3 different programs in kindergarten and 1st grade, and it was 26 different classes. So I think we had 8 classes that used the TV teacher, and maybe 9 that used Size Matters handwriting program, and then we had 5 that used handwriting without tears. Don't quote me on those exact numbers. This was a little bit a while ago. But what we found was that all of the children made significant gains compared to when we were just using random programs, and there was no consistency in the training. Once we got our kids learning handwriting and practicing and being retaught the handwriting, all of them made gains. So it wasn't really about which program that they were learning. It was about the fact that they were practicing consistently and they were learning how to master what was being put in front of them. That's the key to it. So you may be asking, why would I want to teach letter formations in groups? And as I said before, it kind of goes against what I was saying a minute ago. If there's less time, why are we now going to throw more than one letter at them? Well, the thing is, there is less time. So why wouldn't we make the best use of the time we have and teach letters that have similar motor components at once? We'll get our kids to feel successful and we'll scaffold to teach them one more step. This increases your efficiency because it cuts back on your time. It's time efficient and it helps our kids master the skills because they're practicing the same movements again and again. We're using their previous learning and we're building upon it. And it relies on motor planning and motor memory. And this is a big part of learning how to write. We're going to learn more about that. I'm going to tell a story about two little cheerleaders, and I think this story really exemplifies why motor planning is so detrimental to learning how to write. And I think this really exemplifies why motor planning is such an important part of learning a new skill. So we have two cheerleaders. On the left, we have Francesca, and on the right, we have Grace. Both of them were so excited to become cheerleaders. They looked up to the big girls on their block and their big sisters, and they wanted to be just like them and learn how to cheer and wear these fun cheerleading costumes and go to all the games. They couldn't wait to get started. So here's what happened. Francesca's mom signed her up, and when she went to practice, on the very first day, she learned a cheer called Victory. She practiced it. She felt okay about it. She felt like she needed a little more practice. So when she went home, she practiced it again and again. She showed her family, her mom. She was so excited. She couldn't wait to go back to cheerleading camp the next day. But when she went back, instead of practicing the cheer she'd learned the day before, like she thought she would, like she couldn't wait to, the coach started off teaching them a brand new cheer. So she spent the second day learning a whole new cheer, and they didn't review the first cheer. And the two cheers really didn't have anything to do with one another. They didn't have the same movements, they didn't have the same words. So Francesca was a little confused. She went home, and on the third day, she went back and she was hoping to feel better and to feel a little bit more successful with it. But again, her coach taught another brand new cheer. So now Francesca has three cheers in her head, and they're all a little bit jumbled. And she can't really remember the words or the movements that go with any of them consistently. She remembers a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but she doesn't feel successful, and she's not able to do it automatically or quickly or fluidly. Grace, on the other hand, was just as excited as Francesca, couldn't wait, couldn't wait, couldn't wait. And on the first day, she also learned the cheer of Victory. She went to a different cheerleading camp and a different cheerleading coach. She learned Victory, and just like Francesca, went home, was so excited, couldn't wait to get started, showed her dad and her big brother her new cheer, and she felt like, I'm a cheerleader, I've got this. And she practiced it again and again. She goes back the second day, and her cheerleading coach sets up the kids and has them practice the cheer from yesterday. They practice it a few times until the kids feel good and they feel ready to move on a little bit. Once they are, the coach teaches them one more step. So they're practicing Victory, and now they're learning one more little step at the end of Victory, and they all feel pretty good about it. On the third day, they practiced day one and day two together and added one more step. So by the end of the third day, Grace felt great. She'd been practicing these same movements over and over and the same words and songs over and over. She was cheering and she felt successful and she was doing a great job. So we can say, what does that have to do with handwriting? What it has to do is this. If you confuse them, you will lose them. The reason that Francesca felt upset and couldn't get it down was because she wasn't building on any of the things that she was previously learning. She was learning a new skill each time without practicing the old one. If you want to compare it to handwriting, we could compare it to the old traditional way of teaching a capital A, which is two diagonal lines and a line across, and then a lowercase a, which is a little curve, a line up, and a line down. They don't have the same strokes, so they're not the same language. They're not the same size. So when we're talking about where to start, we're not using the same language. And they're not the same strokes, as I said before. So the first letters that she's learning are diagonal. And then the next day, instead of practicing that again and feeling secure about it and mastering it, she's learning a whole new thing by doing lowercase a. On the other hand, if we had taught two letters that were really, really similar, such as, let's say, the letter F, and we learn the letter F, and then the next day, after we practice F a little bit, we add one more stroke at the bottom. Now we've got an E. Our kids are going to feel successful at both letters rather than feeling confused and a little mixed up. Motor planning definitely matters. You might be wondering what motor planning is. Motor planning is the potential to organize and plan out a movement. So you can think about something that you had to learn, something that you motor planned. For me personally, I always go back to this horrible experience I had trying to learn Zumba. So I decided that Zumba was going to be so fun. I wanted to start working out more, but I wanted to work out in a way that was fun and exciting. And I wanted to go with my friends who were all awesome dancers. I never went to dance as a kid, so I didn't have some of those basic moves that the other girls had. But I figured, how hard can it be? Oh my goodness, it was horrible. Everybody in the class had been going again and again and again. So they had tons of practice. But on top of that, they were doing all these moves up, down, over here, swish, swash. I mean, my head was spinning. I felt like I couldn't do anything. And I really felt like a big clod. And it was a little embarrassing, which is silly because, nobody was looking at me. But I was embarrassed and I just felt really frustrated. And I was like, I'm never going back to Zumba. And it stunk because I had bought a whole package, but I never went back because I didn't feel successful at it. And it wasn't fun because I didn't feel successful. We're going to talk about how transfer of learning is also an important part of handwriting. Our goal is for children to transfer the new skill, such as writing a new letter formation correctly, to a natural situation. So if we are teaching them a letter, we want them to then be able to write that letter in class. Or teaching them how to write their name, we want them to be able to write their name in class. It's much easier to transfer learning when motor components are similar. So basically what I just said before, it's easier for a child who has learned the lowercase r to learn lowercase n. They have almost the same movements. It's just one more little hook. So it's building upon previous learning. And this makes a big difference when it comes to feeling successful. When handwriting requires no effort, that's when it's automatic. And when handwriting is automatic is when kids start to write more quick, more faster. They start to get their thoughts out on paper. And this usually is achieved between 3rd and 5th grade. And this is an important time in elementary school because things are kind of ramping up. We've got state tests in many states. Our kids are being expected to write essays. They're being expected to answer data-based questions. And their written answers are expected to be lengthy enough to include the important information that they need to include in order to answer the question. Unfortunately, when our kids struggle with handwriting and it's not automatic to them, if they have to think about the way they form every single letter, they're concentrating more on writing the letters than they are in answering the questions. And this can really end up taking kids a really long time to finish their work, or they may rush through and just not include all of the details that they should. Automaticity is a strong predictor of speed, quality, and quantity. So this is important. We want to make sure that our little guys, when they're learning how to write, learn correctly. And we want them to develop the automaticity for all of the letters. So it becomes like second nature. Think about when we first learned to drive. Oh my goodness, it was so nerve-wracking. You had to think about every single thing. Turn the blinker on. Where's the gas? Where's the brake? Is there a car coming? Where is there a stop sign? How long do I stop? But now, sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but I end up at work and I'm like, oh my goodness, I've been thinking this entire time about what I needed to buy at the supermarket and what I'm going to do after school today and all these other things. I didn't have to concentrate that hard on driving myself to work. It was automatic. It's become so rote and easy for me that I was able to do it safely and smoothly without a lot of work. That's what we want for our kiddos. We've got to Mr. Miyagi them. I wanted a picture of Daniel and Mr. Miyagi in the worst way. But as I said, this is an AOTA approved webinar, so I'm not allowed to violate copyright. And let me just say, if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you don't know who Mr. Miyagi and Daniel are, press pause on this webinar and go to Netflix because you've got to watch Karate Kid. It's just the best movie around. It's so good. And now there's a whole new series on Netflix called Cobra Kai. It's just so great. But this movie is the epitome of figuring out motor planning. So just a quick synopsis. There's this boy, Daniel, and he's being bullied at school. And he ends up making friends with this adorable little old man in his apartment complex who teaches him karate. And Mr. Miyagi sticks up for him and says, I'll help you learn karate so that you won't be getting bullied all the time. And Daniel goes to Mr. Miyagi's house to learn karate. But when Daniel gets there, Mr. Miyagi gives him all these chores and all this housework to do. And he tells Daniel, I want you to wax the car and I want you to do it exactly like this. Do it my way. It has to be perfect. Wax on, wax off. So Daniel's looking at him like, okay, I thought I was going to learn karate. But he does what Mr. Miyagi says. And the next day, the same thing happens. Mr. Miyagi says, okay, I want you to paint my house and I want you to do it exactly like this. So Daniel was getting mad, he's like, I thought I was going to learn karate. I'm having all these issues at school. But he sat there and he painted the house. It took him all day long. By the end of the week, Daniel had it. He blew up at Mr. Miyagi and was like, I thought you were going to teach me karate. And instead, I've been doing all these chores for you. But Mr. Miyagi, as always, wowed him and was like, show me paint the house, show me wax the car. And when Daniel went to do the movements, he was actually doing the karate movements. He was blocking karate punches and he was doing, I don't know the karate words, but he was doing all the movements that he needed in order to practice the karate moves. So Mr. Miyagi basically had him working out and practicing these movements again and again and again. And Daniel developed those muscles. He got stronger and he also developed the motor memory and the motor planning of doing these movements again and again. They were so automatic and rote for him that he ended up getting into like a fake spar with Mr. Miyagi and blocked the kicks and blocked the punches. And he was shocked at himself that he even knew how, but his body just knew what to do because he motor planned. Mr. Miyagi knew what he was talking about. I'll just say that. So I don't really want you to press pause on this webinar, but note to yourself, if you've not watched this movie, you've got to see it. It's awesome. We also can't ignore natural development. This is important. Our kids, when they're about 2 years, 10 months old, are starting to develop the ability to make straight lines. Vertical lines when they're 2 years, 10 months, and horizontal lines when they're 3 years. So look at the little pink lines that I've got up here for you. They're just a scribble. They're just a line. And that is what our kids are supposed to be able to do. Just make a vertical or a horizontal line. On the right, I've got a lot of letters that have horizontal and vertical lines. There's not a ton of them, but there's a good amount. But look at how complicated they are. They might have vertical lines and horizontal lines. I has a little polka dot. Look at 4. It has vertical, horizontal, and vertical. It's a lot. It's not just a little straight line. So if our kids developmentally are only ready to be making a straight line, we've got to be really careful that we're not putting their name in front of them and asking them to write their name. They're just not physically capable. So we shouldn't be expecting it. Around the age of 3, our kiddos are now being able to make curved lines and circular scribbles. Just scribbles, guys. They shouldn't be able to write letters at this time, so it's really not a good idea to ask kids to write their names. Look at all the letters that have curved lines in them. Wow, it's a lot. It's basically most of the letters. But again, the only one that's just a circle is O. Everything else has more complicated movements in it. The lowercase letters, especially, have a lot of curves and straight lines mixed in, and this requires a lot more dexterity and motor planning. So, again, if our kids at 3 years old are only supposed to be able to make a circle, we don't want to be asking them to write their name, especially for some of our kids who have really long names. Some youngsters, their names might be like Alexandria or I don't know. Michaela. I mean, these names are long and there's a lot of letters to them. And we also don't want to just cheat and give them like AJ or Allie when they are going to have to learn how to write their whole name. So we want to just rein in our expectations a bit. In preschool, it's better that our kids are spending time developing hand strength and letter recognition and working on their spatial skills and their social skills than it is for them to be practicing writing because their bodies just aren't ready. Diagonal lines come around the age of 4 years and 7 months. So again, we have a good amount of letters that have diagonal lines, and these are definitely more complicated, especially ones like W and K. They are hard for kids to make. So it's toward the older range that they should be able to make these letters and make them neatly and correctly. We're going to talk a little bit about visual milestones because this also plays an important part in handwriting. By 4.5 years, children should be able to complete or close a simple drawing if they know what it is. So for example, I have this circle here. By 4.5, our kids should be able to recognize that maybe that it's a circle that isn't finished, and they should be able to finish it. By the time they get to be almost around 5, they should be able to recognize a familiar object while only seeing a portion of it. So, for example, this section of a house, kids may recognize, I think that's a house, even though it's not done. By 5.5 years, they should be able to name most uppercase and some lowercase letters. So, 5.5 years, that's about the middle of kindergarten for most children. And look at the expectation. They should be able to name most of the letters, not write all of the letters, name them. By 5.11 years, they should be able to guess what someone is drawing when they're not even done. So that's pretty cool. But it's not what we may think kids should be able to do. Very often, the curriculum demands that kids by the end of kindergarten are writing sentences. They should have completed all of their letters. They should be writing every single letter. They should be writing sight words. They should be reading. Should be copying from the board. Our kids don't have those visual skills yet. So it's important that we don't ignore natural development. Handwriting milestones are also something that we can't ignore. So when a child is about 5 years old, they should be able to print their first name with letters that are large, unclear, and awkward and reversed. So I put my name up there. It looks a bit messy, but you can read it even though it's not perfect. By 5.5, we may have a little bit more control and we may be mixing capitals and lower cases together. But again, that is developmentally appropriate. So many kindergarten teachers that I know get nuts when they see that kids are writing their names in all capitals, or that they're not necessarily that they're writing them mixed, but that they are writing in all capitals. But the thing is that this is developmentally appropriate. And I know, again, so many kindergarten teachers that it kind of drives them nuts. They think of it as a habit that they have to unteach. And I can get that, definitely, especially when you have a class full of children that you're trying to teach proper letter formation. But I don't think they're going to be doing that when they're 40. I'm sure it's going to be okay. It's developmentally appropriate for kids to write with capital letters. It's easier for them and it's less strokes and it requires less fine motor skills, which is basically meeting them where they're at. That's what they're capable of. By 6.5 years, I'm sorry, by 6.1 years, our kids should be able to print simple words with more than 3 letters without copying. And I put this example here, and you can see the spacing is inconsistent, and there is punctuation there, but that's not always a guarantee. And capitals and lowercase are mixed. And this is pretty age appropriate developmentally for what our kids are going to be doing. Again, I keep going back to what's actually expected in the classroom and what their bodies are ready to do. Unfortunately, the curriculum has gotten harder and harder, and so many of our kids are able to keep up. They are just amazing in what they can do, and I give so much credit to these classroom teachers because they are miracle workers. They are angels, and they just accomplish so much. Some of the children are able to rise up because of their wonderful teachers and do things that are beyond their developmental expectations. But we have to always keep in mind those few kids that just aren't there yet and may really be struggling to keep up with that curriculum, which is harder than what their body is really ready to do. They can only work with what they've got. And this is an example that I give to teachers and parents all the time. I've got a big picture of rubber gloves here, and I think it's the perfect example of how our kids are when they're going through their day. The kids only have the fine motor skills that they have. We can't just expect them to be able to thread a needle or tie their shoes or write neatly and small because that's what we expect. Their bodies aren't there yet. They don't have the sensory awareness that we have. They don't have the proprioception. They don't have the control. So I always tell parents and teachers to think about it as though you are going throughout your day with a pair of rubber gloves on. How would your day look? I know for me in the morning, it would be awfully hard to blow dry my hair with rubber gloves on, or put my earrings on, or tie my shoes. It would be kind of rough. And I could see myself being a little cranky and frustrated that I would be expected to do these things and do them quickly and get moving and get, on with my day. So I can see it as a good example of figuring out how our kids are feeling when we're placing demands on them that they're just not ready for. So think about that when we're comparing what the curriculum is asking for and what our kids are really able to do. Traditions and current trends. So let's compare traditions with what is going on now. In the old days, it used to be reading, writing, and arithmetic. In my school, I remember this huge bulletin board, and it was the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. And nowadays, it's just not that way. As I was saying before, reading and math have absolutely stolen the limelight. They have taken precedence, and they are what everybody's looking at. Administrators are scrutinizing reading and math, and that trickles down to the teachers. The teachers are feeling pressure to show success for our kids in the reading and in the math. And so that's what they're going to prioritize in their day. It just makes sense. Many teachers are being evaluated on the teacher scores. So, of course, they're going to focus on that and hone in on that. And that automatically just makes less time for handwriting instruction and practice that we would like. In the old days, our kids were writing from capital A and lowercase a, and then maybe capital B and lowercase b. And the reason that wasn't the end of the world was because they weren't spending preschool learning how to write. They weren't even picking up a pencil or learning how to write until kindergarten or first grade. Back in the old days, 20, 30 years ago, many kids didn't even go to kindergarten. So those expectations they weren't on them. When the kids were learning those letters, they were ready. They might not have been wearing the rubber gloves. They were able to form diagonals. So it was easier for them because they had maybe more playtime, more time developing their motor skills before they were presented with the task of learning how to write. Back in the old days, too, there was a lot of combining reading and writing. Children would learn capital A and lowercase a, and they would put that in with the letter sound, A, apple, A. And it is important, of course, to have kids relate the letter sound to what the letter is. But we don't want to teach in A to Z order just because of the letter sound. We don't want to ignore what's developmentally appropriate. Kids have limited time for handwriting remediation, so we want to attack it with a way that is practical, that makes sense, and that works for our current education system now. Consistency is key. No matter what handwriting program you're using, it's really important that you follow through. Parents, teachers, and therapists should all be using the same language when they're working with their kids in terms of writing. So, different handwriting programs have different language. So, they might call the lines something different, they may call the strokes something different, and that's fine. It's just important though that when we're teaching the child and when we're working with the child and practicing, that we're using the same language. We want to keep in mind, as we learned before, that 1 in 4 children have difficulty with handwriting. A lot of those children have other difficulties in school or other learning disabilities, including speech delays. So it's important that we're not all using different language, different handwriting terms. Most programs, most developmentally appropriate programs anyway, have the language for each letter right on their website for free. I know Handwriting Without Tears offers that. The TV Teacher offers that. I'm not sure if Size Matters offers that. And there's other programs as well. You want to make sure that the parents, the teachers, and the therapists are all using the same language and the same terminology when you're going over the letters with our kids. It makes it just easier for them. If you are a therapist who may go to a bunch of different schools and you might not be a part of the school where you're familiar exactly with what the curriculum is, please ask. It is important that you find out so that you're following through with whatever the teacher is doing. And if the school, and I hope this isn't true, but if your school doesn't have a consistent program, then if you're the teacher in the classroom, please pick one. Again, there are many programs that are available online, and you can get the language and you can use the consistent language that's developmentally appropriate as well as the developmental order. As I said before, the 2-page or the 4-page letter formation, how to teach letters in order handout that you can get right on my website gives a quick and easy snapshot of how to teach the letters in developmentally appropriate order. And it just makes it easier for our kids. We also want to be using consistent paper. We don't want, when our kiddos are first learning, to be presenting them with a ton of different kinds of paper. It's just confusing for them. On the other hand, as it goes down the road and the kids are getting more comfortable, we have to be aware that their math workbook might not have the same writing lines that their reading notebook has. That's okay. We have to model it for them and teach them how to write on the different lines when it comes to the point that they're ready to do that. So one of our objectives is to recognize which letter formations and numbers should be taught together. So on the left side, I have capital F and capital E together, as well as lowercase c, lowercase a, and lowercase d. Lowercase c is a pretty special letter, actually. A lot of programs make a big deal about him. Size Matters program calls him Super C, and Handwriting Without Tears calls him Magic C, because a lot of other lowercase letters start with a lowercase c. So let's go back to Francesca and Grace again, or Mr. Miyagi, and think about how if we teach our children to make a lowercase c and they get really good at it, when it comes time to teach them a new letter, all we have to do is add a little stroke up, down to teach them A. Or if we're making a C and we add a little stroke, we could teach them to turn it into an O. But because they've already gotten the C down, it's easier for them. They feel more successful at it, and their hand is used to making that movement. So it just makes sense. Look at capital F and capital E. If our kids get comfortable making a capital F. We start at the top, back to the top, little line across, and little line across. Once they feel good making that letter, it's a piece of cake to teach them to do it again and add another line at the bottom. Their motor memory is already developed, and now we're using the little time that we have to add one more thing. We're scaffolding by adding one more step and teaching them how to make the letter E as well as the letter F. On the other hand, or I should say on the other side, let's look at capital A and lowercase a and capital B and lowercase b. So capital A starts at the top, and we have a diagonal line down. I should go the other direction for you guys. A diagonal line down, then the pencil is supposed to go back to the top, another diagonal, and then a little line across. So that's 3 different lines. A little confusing, but once the child practices it a few times, they may feel okay about it. But then the next thing they're going to learn is a little curve and a line up, down. If they don't go together, except for the fact that they have the same sound. Reading and writing doesn't need to be taught at the same time. There's no reason that when we're teaching handwriting, we have to teach capital A and lowercase a at the same time. We can do other kinds of activities to teach our kids that these letters go together, but it doesn't have to be writing. It doesn't have to be physically practicing the letters because they don't go together when it comes to motor planning. Even capital B and lowercase b. Let's look at it. Capital B and lowercase b, they do actually kind of look a little bit alike, but when it comes to forming them, it's not the same. Capital B starts at the top. We do a big line down, and for capitals, we want our kids to pick their pencil back up, go to the top. For capital B, we've got little curve, little curve. But for lowercase b, he's also a tall letter. He starts at the top. He goes a straight line down and then straight back up. For lowercase, we don't want our children picking up their pencil. And the reason for that is because when they pick up their pencil, which they're supposed to be able to do when they're younger, because they're only learning capital letters and straight line letters and things like that when they're younger, they're going to have gaps and it's going to be harder for them to control. So lowercase letters and letters that have multiple kinds of curves, like a lowercase a, up, down, and a b, there's more movement and more coordination that's needed in these little small muscles of the hand. So that's why they're a little bit harder. But capital B, lowercase b, starts at the top, goes down, back, up, and over. So it's not the same movements as capital B. And when we combine those 2 letters, it can get a little confusing for our kids. And then they start picking up their pencil all the time, or maybe never picking up their pencil. And you might think, well, who cares? It's not a big deal. But research shows that starting the letters at the top increases legibility and it increases speed and control. So we do want to give our kids those good habits to start off with. These are the capital letters that should be taught together. You can go by letter strokes like we talked about before, or by start spot. Start spot is basically the spot that you first put your pencil in order to make the letter. Straight line letters F and E go together. I mean, they look so much alike. It's so easy for kids to learn one more little step, and now they've got both letters down. The line and curve letters are D, P, B, and R. Now, you may say, well, do I have to teach them in that exact order? Do I have to teach D before I teach P? Do I have to teach P before I teach R? Of course, nothing is set in stone. You have to do it the way that it works for you, but going in order according to developmental progression and developmental order is definitely the most helpful. So for me, let's say I had a child whose name started with R, and the class might be pressing for the child to learn their name, I wouldn't just start off by teaching him R. I would teach him P first, because P is the beginning of R. So I hope that that makes sense. In order to make a P, we start at the top, down, up, little curve. B is the same thing. We make the P and then we do it and we add the one more little step to the cheer or to the letter and we change it into something else. So for R, start at the top, down. Now I've got my P down. I'm so confident in the letter P because I've been practicing it, practicing it. Now to make an R, all I have to do is add a little line. Pencil pickup diagonals. Now you may say, why aren't N and M together with V and W and X? And they're all diagonals. That's true. But N and M have a different start spot, meaning they start at the top. N and M have a different movement. They start at the top, they do a big line down, and then they have a pencil pickup to get back to the top and to finish the letter. The rest of the diagonal letters don't. So when we think about V and W, they're not picking up their pencil when they get to the bottom, just like they are for N and M. So N and M are easier to teach together because they have that consistency of stroke down, hop to the top, and do the rest. The unique uppercase letters, I put H and K and L and U. Now, these letters aren't identical to any other letter, but they're not that hard to put with another group of letters. So if you have one of those letters in a child's name and you want to get to it a little faster, it's really not that hard to put it with another letter with similar strokes or a similar start spot. So for example, the letter L, it would be easy to put that up with F and E because it's still the stroke down, and then rather than the two at the top, we're doing the one at the bottom. I hope that that makes sense. One thing that we should know for our lefties, our little lefties, they're learning the letters in the same way. The only real difference when it comes to our lefties is that it's okay to either teach them or to allow them, if they start to do it naturally, to make their horizontal strokes going in instead of going out. So what I mean by that is a horizontal stroke letter, like let's say the letter E. A righty would start at the top, big line down, and then go in and go out. 1, 2, 3. But a lefty may do their line straight down, and then instead of going out, they might go in because it's easier to pull the line across than it is to push the line out. And that just goes with hand strength and dexterity. So you can either teach your lefty to do it that way, to start at the end of the E and pull in towards the first stroke, or you may notice that they start doing it on their own because it's just easier, and I wouldn't discourage it. It makes it easier for them, and it's just goes easier for their hand strength. Our starts with C letters in terms of capitals are C and O and G. It's obvious that they all start with a C. And then we have Q, which on this slide right here, he's looking a little funky, but we don't really teach our kids to make a Q like that. We teach them to make an O and then the little line across. And again, that starts with a C. You can also teach kids S by teaching them C first. Start with a small C and turn around and go home, or whatever the language is that you use with the program that you're using. You want to be, of course, consistent. Our center starting letters, we've got A, I, T, and J. I, T, and J are so easy to teach together. They have similar strokes. They start at the top and go down. A is kind of out there on his own. He's causing all kinds of trouble, and it's a little confusing as to why he's the very first letter of the alphabet. And that's why I always say we don't want to teach the letter A first, because he's got no other letters that have similar formations, and he's got diagonals. So he's more confusing. We don't want to start with A. So these are just a couple of examples of teaching letters together rather than teaching a whole page of T. You can teach T and I on the same day or in the same week. We want to get our kids making those movements again and again, so that, again, like Mr. Miyagi, we get the muscle memory and the motor planning so that it becomes automatic and that our kids are making the letters properly from the beginning. So you can teach T and I together or T and J together, or you could do all three. You're making more use of the little bit of time that you have and practicing those letters. I like to use these kinds of sheets after I teach the child the letter for repetition and practice, and to just kind of build mastery of what the letter looks like and how to form the letters also. Rainbow writing is one of my first like very favorite ways of teaching kids how to write. And I started rainbow writing, especially because of this one little boy that I had. His name was John. And what I call rainbow writing may not be what you think of as rainbow writing, because I have seen some teachers do activities in their classroom and they call it rainbow writing, and it's definitely different from what I call rainbow writing. So I'll just explain my way and then I'll talk about the difference. So again, I had this little boy. His name was John. Oh, he was the biggest love. He was so cute and such a sweetheart, but he really struggled with writing and he disliked it so intensely. He was a really small child, so his hands were small. He had weak hand strength. He was a lot smaller. And in terms of his motor skills, he was probably functioning at around a 3-year-old level, even though he was in kindergarten. So easy to say, handwriting was not easy for him. And so he didn't like it. He didn't feel successful. And he would say to me, although he was like such a sweetheart, Miss Jamie, I don't want to do it. I don't want any part of it. So we kind of came up with a compromise. And what I would do is I would have him pick 5 or 6 crayons, any colors he wanted, and we would put them on the left side of his body because he was a lefty. And what we would do is I would teach the letters that he was learning in groups. So, for example, F and E, like on this page, and he would have to write both letters in one color. So let's say he'd pick up red and he'd have to make the F correctly inside the outline. I always like to use outline letters because I like to see what it is the child's drawing. He would have to do the F and then he'd have to do the E with the red crayon. Once he was done with both letters, he's putting the red crayon on the other side of him, done with red. And now we go to the next crayon. So this was a great motivator for my little John because he had a light at the end of the tunnel and he would see, okay, that one's finished. I only have these left. And little by little, he would get through the 5 or 6 crayons that we had chosen. And he would feel like he did his work, which he did, but it wasn't so long. It was only 5 crayons. But from my perspective, he was writing each letter 5 times in the different colors. So he was getting that extra practice. So rainbow writing for me, when I do rainbow writing with kids, I want them to write the letters in the same color because I don't want them to spend more time changing colors and picking up crayons and dropping crayons and getting it right in their fingers than I do want them spending writing. So I have seen, for example, in a couple of kindergarten classes, some of the teachers that I work with will have kids do rainbow writing to learn sight words. And what they'll do is they'll have a word, sight words like the, and the kids are allowed to write each letter in a different color. And this apparently is a great way for the kids to recognize that THE spells the. And of course, it's fun for them because they love switching colors and switching crayons. And that's another way to do rainbow writing. My preference is to do it this way and to have them lined up and the kids can move them over and they're kind of done with that crayon once they're finished with the page. And it's a great way to get that extra practice in at the same time of making the kids feel good and developing that automaticity. So for capital letters, D, P, B, and R all start at the top. They have little curves, except for D, which has a big curve. And I put the language on here on the right, big line down, hop to the top, just because I wanted to remind myself that when we're teaching kids how to make the letters, we want to add in that component. We have our kids who are auditory learners, and we want them to have that input that might help them. Big line down, hop to the top, or whatever other little chant or lesson from the handwriting program has. We want them to have that. So definitely encourage your kids to use the language of the program, to say it out loud. If there's songs, sing them, have fun, because that makes it better for our kids who are multisensory learners, our kids who are auditory learners, and it's just a better way to incorporate all the different aspects. When you have letters in outline like this, you can also change it up. It doesn't have to be just pencil and paper. You can have kids take Play-Doh and roll snakes and make big lines with the snakes and small lines with the snakes, and then figure out where do they go to make the letters. It's not necessarily that they're practicing the motor memory of the letter at that moment, but they're still with their brain focusing on recognizing big and small and top and bottom and curve and line. And all of these things are important components that we need our kids to develop. You can also take dry erase sheets and have the kids go over it and do the rainbow writing in a dry erase sheet or a Ziploc bag and have them write it with the different colors. There's so many different things you can do. You can put it in a cookie sheet and have them write with finger paint or ketchup, whatever you have. I know some of us are dealing with teletherapy at this point, and we're trying to come up with things that are more hands-on, but we may have kids that don't have a lot of stuff at home. You can even, instead of writing with a pencil, change it up and have the kids write with a Q-tip or do something silly. Doesn't really matter as long as they're getting that motor memory down. So here are diagonal letters. They go together because they start at the top and they slide down. So X and Y are a little different than V and W. X because you have to pick up your pencil. So he does slide down like V and W, but then he's got to go back up and make the opposite stroke. For Y, I always teach my children to make Y this way, which has a little line down and then back to the top and a big line down. And the reason I do that is because very often when our kids look at Y, especially in the traditional capital Y, it looks like this and has the line straight down. Our kids visually see it, and what they see is the letter V. And what they want to do is draw a V real quick and then add a line at the bottom. And very often when they're younger, it looks okay. But again, as they start writing more quickly and going faster, they may end up with gaps between their lines and overlaps and things like that, which can impact their legibility. So here we go with our capital C, starts with C letters, C, G, O, and Q. We want to teach C pretty early on because a lot of letters come from the letter C. Most children don't make their C backwards. It's just not a letter that's commonly reversed, which is great because then when we teach them that G and O and Q start with a C, then they're making those correctly too. And that also limits out on the reversals. When you're teaching handwriting, you do also want to emphasize the size of letters. All of these letters, all of the capital letters are tall, and a lot of the lowercase letters are tall as well. I like to make boxes around the letters, especially if I'm having a child who's struggling with writing consistently and having the letters line up or start and lay on the lines properly. I like to make boxes, so it's another visual reminder of how the letters should fit. And this is something that Handwriting Without Tears program does as well. Also, the Size Matters program. They don't use boxes like this, but they do use color coding, and they'll call the letters size 1 letters or size 2 letters. It depends, but it doesn't really matter as long as you're using the consistent language that your child's program is using. You also want to emphasize teaching the start spot. I kind of make it really fun when I'm teaching start spots, and I do Emeril. For those of you who may not know, Emeril is a chef who has his own TV show, and he's really adorable little Italian guy, and he loves spices. And whenever he adds spices to his cooking, he throws the spice in and he's like, I'm going to add the garlic, bam. Now I'm going to add the pepper, bam. And he's just really popular and everybody loves him because he's fun. I have my kids say bam when they put their pencil on the start spot. So again, I like to always emphasize the start spot with a star or a dot or something so that the kids really visually recognize that it does matter where they start their pencil. So just an interesting little tidbit. Many, many children start their letters at the bottom, and it can be like a really hard habit to change. But one interesting tidbit that I learned that I read somewhere was that Freud says that the reason kids start so many letters at the bottom is because it goes back to ego. And they think that the whole world revolves around them. So when they go to make a letter or when they're learning how to make a shape or a circle for the first time, they start it at their own body and go away. So this makes a lot of sense. This is why our kids innately just start their letters at the bottom. That's why, again, it's important to wait until they're old enough and they're ready to learn it the proper way rather than just making the letters any old way. These letters on the left all start in the top left corner. So that's a large majority of letters. They start in the top left corner. And then we have a couple of other capitals that start in the center. You want to emphasize that when the children are writing the letters because it helps them to start it in the proper spot, which is the very first step in writing legibly and correctly. This is a great little 2-page quick reference page that is in our companion workbook. It emphasizes the lowercase start spots as well as the uppercase start spots. And I love to use this actually to send home to parents and to teachers to remind them. And especially for a kid who's always starting everything at the bottom, I'll send this home with a little note like, can you just remind Johnny that we have to always start our letters at the start spot, and we love to put our pencil on the start spot and say bam, or yeah, bam. And you know, a regular kindergarten teacher, of course, is not going to want 20 kids yelling bam all throughout the kindergarten year. However, during handwriting lessons, it definitely really makes a difference. I've seen firsthand, and the kids have fun with it. So it's a great way to just emphasize those start spots. But this little cheat sheet, this 2-page cheat sheet, is a great way to kind of get everybody on the same page. Remember, we are a team. We're all working to help our kids together. So it's important that we're all using the same information and the same terminology. So send it home to the parents. It's in the companion workbook, and it'll be a help for everybody. When it comes to lowercase letters, here are our groupings. We have the mini-me letters, and I call them mini-me because the lowercase letters are exactly the same as the capital letters. And this means that our kids have already gotten all of these letters down. So if they already learned capital C and capital O and capital S, they have the lowercase letters as well, which is amazing. So that means these mini-me letters are 7 out of 26 letters. That means 27% of their lowercase letters are already accomplished. How awesome is that? Then we have our starts with C letters. We have C-A-D-G-O. I always teach C very early on because so many letters start with C, and they're all really frequently used letters. E, in my opinion, he's a tricky guy. He starts in the middle of nowhere, not like the rest of the letters who start on the top line or the middle line. He starts in the middle of the middle line. So he needs extra practice, in my opinion, and he's very, very frequently used. So for E, I like to teach E by himself, and I definitely recommend extra practice for E because, again, he's used very frequently. Driving down letters. This is R, N, M, H, B, and P. These are great for developing automaticity and consistency because they all have the same movements. We've got straight line letters, I, L, T, and J, and then the diagonal lowercase and the unique lowercase letters. So these are all the easiest groupings. And when you look at them, you can see why they go together. So here are some of our lowercase letters. Now these sheets that I'm showing you, I call them rainbow writing sheets, but they are in the basics packet, which you can get on my website. It's in the shop. Very often it's included with the Jamboards, and it's included with the companion workbook, but not always. So just check that out. This is the basics packet, which goes over the main groupings, which really, if you conquer these, you've gotten the majority of the letters, which is wonderful. So this is a little trick that I love to teach for the driving down letters. Now, Handwriting Without Tears calls these dive down letters, And some of the other programs have their own terminology for it. And it doesn't matter as long as we've got the formations down. I noticed though that a lot of my little guys, they like to pick up their pencil when they're learning these letters because they may still be in the habit from capitals. But I like to use these sheets and I tell my kids to picture jumping on a trampoline. And all of these letters get to jump on the trampoline. They start at the top, they go down, and then boing, they get to go back up and over. Now, our kids love to make the sound effects, but again, these little letter stories of how the letters are formed helps our kids who have the motor planning issues because it gives them a sequence of what to do. It reminds them and it helps them to remember how to form the letter properly. So I love to always remember about the trampoline. And I've done this where I've drawn the trampoline on the whiteboard and I have the kids go up and they get to make it really big and yell boing. I have them do it with their whole body and tell me that they start at the top and they dive down and up, back and over. And then I have them yell and bounce back up, boing, just so they remember that it's all one stroke. And the reason, again, that we want it to be all one stroke is because when they start writing more, it's going to be a lot faster for them. And that will be, of course, important because they're writing quickly, they're getting the information out there, and they're not concentrating so hard on the letter formations because we want those to be automatic by then. Here are our straight line letters. I love to tell my kids that it's just a polka dot, not a lollipop. So that kind of accomplishes two things, two birds with one stone. I don't want the dot of the letter resting on top of the letter, but I also don't want a big old messy blob. I tell my kids it's just a polka dot, boop, not a lollipop. And I also will very often model for them a lollipop letter. So I'll make it and I'll put a big messy blob at the top and I'll have them point out next to the neat one, which one's a polka dot, which one's a lollipop. Okay, we want to eat lollipops, we don't want to write them. So that's a good little letter story. And again, many handwriting programs, especially the ones that are developmentally appropriate and really geared towards what's right for the children and helping kids motor plan, they'll have little letter stories, which is wonderful for our kids who need a little bit of help with the sequencing. So here are our mini me letters worksheets. Again, this is in the basics packet, which is available on my sheet, but they're very easy to make on your own as well. You just want to go onto your computer and do letters in outline form. Certain fonts are kind of tricky, and that was why I ended up creating my own font. But you can use Comic Sans. You can put it in outline font. You can use word art. There are a lot of ways to finagle making your own handwriting sheets. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be complicated. So these, again, are the diagonal lowercase letters, perfect for rainbow writing. Diagonals are harder. Like we said before, kids learn straight lines, vertical lines, horizontal lines, and circles before they learn diagonals. So diagonals can be a little tricky. They require more intrinsic movement and precision. So it can be harder for kids. When you're writing with your kids, you want to try to keep it simple. So I put this up as an example. My preference is to teach with outline. I also really like using a highlighter to teach kids how to write. On the left, we have something that we see a lot when it comes to a handwriting program. We may see dots and start here and stop here dots. We may see arrows telling us which direction to go in. Sometimes there's numbers giving us like do this first and this second. We have to keep in mind that many of our children are confused and overwhelmed by a lot of visual stimuli. So we as grown-ups know that the red one must mean stop and the green one must mean go. But our children don't drive. So they don't have that innate knowledge. It has to be kind of taught. And they're really learning a lot of other things at this point in terms of how to write their letters. So it can be overwhelming to add that in. On top of the arrows and the directionality, it can be a lot. So I tend to steer away from handwriting pages or letters, programs that look like this on the left. Highlighter is great to use when you're one-on-one with a child. Again, my preference is for something where I can see what the child is actually writing. With a highlight letter, I can see that they picked up their pencil in the middle. I can see that their line might be a little shaky, so I need to work on pencil control. I can see if they started at the bottom even. But with the dotted lines, again, we want to go back to those visual milestones that a child is developing visual closure skills at 5.11. They should be able to guess something that's halfway done. But if our kids don't know what that letter looks like, so this letter A would be something that would be presented way earlier than 5.11. Our brain looks at something that's partially done, like these dotted lines, and our brain fills them in because we have visual closure skills. So we know that that's actually an A. But our kids just see dotted lines. They don't automatically have the knowledge of, oh, it's an A, and I'm going to trace on top of the lines. Think of how many kids' activity pages and activity workbooks have connect the dots. Kids are used to doing those kinds of things. So sometimes they may look at something like this one on the left and they may just be end up connecting the dots, and they're concentrating more on connecting the dots than they are on actually making a straight stroke. So I always go to highlight if I'm working with one child, but the problem with highlight is if you're working with more than one child, it doesn't photocopy well. And of course, if you are a kindergarten teacher or a teacher who has a group of children, it could take way too long to end up highlighting for a lot of kids because who has time? So then I go to outline form. And again, if you go onto a Word doc or a Google doc and you use outline, you can make your own sheets. I mean, it doesn't take that long. You can figure it out. And that was what I ended up doing for myself. But once I had finished creating all the different letters and all the forms that I wanted, I was so excited that I wanted to share it with you. And that's why I have this webinar and also why I made the workbook. But by all means, it's not that hard to make your own either. Many handwriting programs include a self-evaluation component. So there may be something where they have to look at their letter and then check it off that they did it correctly, or look at their work and circle the best one. And this is something that is actually, research shows it's a good aspect of handwriting programs. Kids should be expected to self-monitor their own work. It gives them some ownership over what it is that they're doing. So these are some of the free resources that are available on my site. Just go to missjamieot.com. They're in my free products section, or they're also available in my shop, and they're $0. I created them because I want to make resources for teachers and therapists and parents that will help them and help your kids. So on the left, we just have an I'm writing neatly checklist, and you can, this is great, I think, to use class-wide as a class-wide reward program. Just put, cut them off and put them on each child's desk, or you can have one per table if your kids are sharing tables, although a lot of kids aren't sharing tables nowadays. But you catch someone writing neatly, and as the teacher or as the parent, you can give them a sticker or a stamp or a hole punch or whatever, and then they can earn their reward. Kids love to earn rewards and they want to please you. So when they have this little visual reminder on their desk or on their pencil case, it helps them to remember that this is what you want from them and they want to please you. So they will try to earn their reward. On the right, this handwriting checklist is geared more towards our older children. They would be able to read the actual checklist, which says, make sure your tall letters are tall and your small letters are small. Don't forget to proofread. But again, this is a great way to have just a visual cue on the children's desk, or nowadays on the kids' plexiglass divider at the front of their desk, so that they can start taking a little bit of ownership and start self-evaluating their very own work, rather than always having a grown-up look at it and tell them what mistakes they may be making. Let's review some concepts. So we have our uppercase letters, and you can see at the right, we've got pink, which says these letters all start at the top left corner. So the majority of our capital letters start at the top left corner. You can see by the rows how our letters are grouped and how they go together. On the bottom, we have our letters that start in the top center. So those are our starts with C letters and then our other center starting letters. But for the most part, our caps start at the top left corner. Then we have our lowercase letters. Again, we have our mini-me's, and our kids have already accomplished these if we go in developmental order, which is to teach capitals first. Then we've got our starts with C letters. And again, a lot of these letters are already accomplished too. Our kids already know C and they already know O because that was a mini-me. E is our tricky letter, definitely needs some extra practice. And then our driving down letters. Again, there's a lot of them. So once our kids accomplish this group, once they develop the motor memory of this, they are accomplishing a lot in one session. Or I should say, they're accomplishing a lot by gaining that motor memory because all of the letters have the same movements. We also have our straight line letters, our diagonal lowercase, and then our unique lowercase. Our bottom line when it comes to handwriting is that it's important to build on previously learned skills. Practice makes perfect, and research shows that kids do need practice in order to make gains. We can't just teach them something and then not review it and not go over it again and again and expect them to remember it. They won't, and their bodies won't remember it. They won't retain that muscle memory or that motor memory. Research shows that 6 weeks is enough to see a little bit of difference in most kids. And that's wonderful because 6 weeks is not really that long, but it does need to be taught consistently so that the kids can master it. Repetition builds motor memory. Always go back to Mr. Miyagi or the story of the cheerleaders when you want to explain that to parents or teachers about the importance of repetition. The bottom line is our kids do need practice, but we don't want to overdo it. They don't need to practice pages and pages of letters. They just need to practice the same movements enough so that they feel successful. And then the next step is to build upon that learning. So, just a reminder, in order to get your CEUs, you've got to take the assessment, and that was emailed to you. If you don't see the email when you purchased this webinar in your inbox, please check your spam. I bet you $1,000,000 that that's where it is. But if it isn't, then again, don't forget, email me at customerservice@missjamieot.com, and I'm so happy to help you figure out where it went, and we will get it to you so that you can earn your AOTA CEUs. The workbook that I talked about throughout this webinar is 120 pages. It has each letter on its own page all by itself in case you want to teach it that way. And then it has it with the other letters that it goes with, like I showed before, T, I, and J, or T and I and T and J. They're all together. So this is a 120-page resource that I made for my own use that I started using for myself. And I liked it so much that I wanted to share it with everybody else. So if you're interested, this is the link. You can get that. And then I also created Jamboards. So if you're not familiar with Jamboards, this is basically a virtual whiteboard that all you need is a Gmail account, and then you can use Jamboards. And they're really, really easy to make on your own. If you want to see a great tutorial on it, check out the OT guide on YouTube. She is basically the one who taught me how to use Jamboards. I started looking and trying to research how to do it, and I came across her tutorial, and then she and I actually made a video together about it because it's so easy to use and so versatile. So I made Jamboards to go along with this webinar of how to teach the letters in groups. So for therapists who are using virtual therapy or who may need to have some way to teach handwriting or review and practice over the computer, then the Jamboards are perfect for you. And you can also, again, create your own. Don't forget to check out that tutorial. Remember, if you have any kind of issues, email me at customerservice@missjamieot.com. I'm excited to take care of you. I thank you so much for watching my webinar, and I want to make sure that you get the resources that you tried to download, whether they were free resources or paid resources. It doesn't matter. As I said before, it's my mission to help you to help your kids. So I want to make sure that you get what you need. The references are included in your CEUs. When you got your email with your slides and your CEU link, your references were included in it. So all of these are here for your review. And if you're interested, I really liked this article by Hoy et al. That was a really good one. It was a systematic review of handwriting. I like that one. It was a lot of references in here. So I wanted to say thank you very much for attending my webinar, and I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you have any concerns, let me know. I appreciate you attending, and I hope to see you soon at my next webinar. Have a great day.